The NES is an amazing console. One thing that I like more than discovering a hidden gem on this awesome console is finding pirated games, bootlegs, hacks that just blow my mind. Who did this and why? Today we're going to be looking at 8 RPGs that were bootlegged and backported onto the NES from some Chinese companies. It is very strange. Hold on to your butts, let's just get into it. One of my favorite games of all time, to which many of you probably know because I just talked about it a couple months ago, Chrono Trigger. This company, which is very hard to say, hold on here, Shenzhen Nanjing Technology. Okay, I did it. So they ported this, or backported this game from the Super Nintendo onto the NES. It is hard to know because there's a bunch of Chinese, but they crafted these scenarios. It's clearly not the sprites. They used sprites from something else or made their own. I don't know how they did this, but I do know that all of them are not their sprites. For example, if you go into the menu, you see the classic, although a little bit down-res version of Chrono's portrait from the Super Nintendo version. In the battle screen, it kind of looks like the back of Chrono, except you're fighting monsters. One monster I'm not sure of, I'm sure it's probably from some other RPG, but yeah, that's a Beedrill, and if you look here, that's a Rhyhorn. You're fighting Pokemon, you're Chrono. Again, if you watch the story part at the beginning, it looks like you're going through the rhythms of the beginning of the game. So it's just, why? Why? It's so weird, but I found myself playing more than I probably should have of the game. Next is Everquest. I don't really know that much about it in that it was a huge console RPG on the PS2, PC, and whatnot. But I do know it's based on like those Norath games, and that looks like some high fantasy. This one is clearly based on, it seems more like Japanese mythology. You're like a samurai and you're fighting weird mythological ghosts and monsters. I have no idea if this is like a repurposed sprite from something else, or if they're just like, let's just do samurais and call it Everquest and just bank on that name. I have no idea. Again, since I don't know much of the series, I can't say much, but yeah, just very odd. And here we have Final Fantasy. Now there's actually quite a few pirated Final Fantasy games. For the purpose of this one, let's just look at the just Final Fantasy. And I really have no idea what's going on. Okay, so it's using like house-based sprites from Link's Awakening from the Game Boy in an NES form, but there's also character sprites from the Final Fantasy Adventure on the Game Boy, which is the first Mana game, and then it's turn-based battles. It looks very similar to Chrono Trigger, and it's like a background with just simple character movements and stuff. This is like a hodgepodge of so many things. I'm just very confused. I'm thinking that it's called Final Fantasy because it's trying to actually be the Final Fantasy Adventure, but like with Link stuff. I don't know. I really don't know which one this one's going for. Like Chrono Trigger, Golden Sun seems to be very well done in kind of a juxtaposition of the original GBA title. You got like the Jin forms of the sprites on the title screen there. Everything looks like it's going through the motions just like in Chrono Trigger out of the beginning of Golden Sun. The sprites look a little bit more like the characters from the game, though the monsters kind of look like Bioshock Big Daddies kind of hunched over on all fours. Bad music, again, just a blank black screen. So it's not like they are really trying hard, but you gotta give them some kind of form for actually trying to make this a demake and look more like actual Golden Sun. And like Final Fantasy, there's a plethora of Pokemon games on the NES. Actually, pretty much almost all Pokemon games are on the NES, save for the newer, like, pretty much DS onwards, there's none. But pretty much everything beforehand is. This one specifically is Pokemon Yellow. Again, since it was on the Game Boy, kind of upporting it or backporting it to the NES is kind of good. It looks pretty good on the NES. You're still fighting Pokemon, there's a bunch of Chinese, so you don't know what's going on, but nothing is sabotaged for something else. It's all correct. It's just an NES port of Pokemon, and that's pretty sweet. The most legit bootleg, I guess, on this whole list. I'm not really sure what's going on with this port of Tales of Fantasia. It kind of looks like the beginning of the game, again, in a more Chrono Trigger, like, everyone seems drabbed in the aesthetic of like a Chinese culture, but the actual sprites in the game looks like a turn-based version of the battle system from the GBA remake of Tales of Fantasia. It's fine in terms of that. That's what mostly looks like Tales of Fantasia. Everything else, not really that much. It's, again, just a really bizarre one on the list. This may be quite possibly one of my favorite games on this specific list, at least, because it takes the Minish Cap, and again, it follows, you know, it has the sprites of more like the Game Boy Link's Awakening, but it takes all that stuff, kind of shoehorns it in, makes it, you know, like you're going through the motions, but then it, like all these games, it's a turn-based RPG in a battle square, kind of like Super Mario RPG. And you're fighting Octoroks and those green jellies, and it looks kind of cool. Link has spells. It's not just a blank background. This one seems like they put a little bit more work into it. Again, maybe, and I know it's just a bootleg, but I would like an actual Zelda game that's a turn-based RPG. I've wanted one for so many years. There's so many games in the whole Nintendo universe that I want to be turned into a spin-off of an RPG, even if it's just like a Smash Brothers version and everybody's in it. I don't know. Anyway, that aside, this game's pretty neat, I guess. It seems fitting that the last game, Titanic, is the most insane, in that it's not a backport of a Nintendo game, it's a backport, well no, it's an RPG of a movie. There's another bootleg platformer that has Leonardo DiCaprio and the other girl, and it's bad. It's a platformer. This was an RPG that kind of looks like it's using Resident Evil chibi sprites. Very weird. Again, turn-based RPG, you're fighting cockroaches, and you're Jack. And yeah, not much to say on it, but just strange that they just chose, like, hey, Titanic, let's make a game of it, and it's an RPG. And yeah, so there you have it. 8 just very, very strange RPGs for the NES, backported from their original consoles. The Chinese are very, very strange. And again, I was a little wishy-washy in this one because there's not a lot of info on these games at all. So everything came from my experience on playing these games and knowing them from their original titles. So sorry if this one was a little weird and wonky and I used the same words more than once, more than 10 times. But yeah, well, until next time, hopefully I got a little bit better grasp on things. Okay, see you then.